Hi guys. Can someone let me know if you can hear me and see me? That'd be useful. Hopefully you can, and I'll just let people start to filter in. If you could pop it in the chat. Awesome. Thank you. Hi Chris. And so in the thank you Dario. So in the Q&A bit, the bit where Dario has just put a little thing, feel free to pop down your questions that you want me to answer. Today's session is going to be a little bit different because I've got quite a lot of questions for us to go through. And that means there may not be as much time for the sorts of Q&A part. But, I figure I didn't want to kind of go through some of the questions and not kind of, and sort of, leave you guys with only half the information. So feel free to start popping them down now. I'll just give a few more minutes for people to kind of start to filter in. I don't know if our numbers will be affected by the England match. I've got it on in front of me, but I will, make sure to, attend to you guys as much as possible. I am a professional after all. So let me just share the PowerPoint. And can you guys let me know, can you now see my slide saying welcome? If you could let me know in the chat, can you see my slide? Okay, awesome. Thank you, Emma. Okay, so you can see there, so the Q&A part, which is on the top banner, that's for you guys to put your questions down. And if you could upvote questions that you want me to answer, then that will help me to kind of see which ones I need to answer first. And let me just launch the first poll, which is just to kind of help me know what kind of level you guys are at. So this surgery is going to be about the decision-making part of the UCAT, which is, I think a bit of a tricky one because there are lots of different types of questions and there aren't too many resources out there that actually tell you what the question types are. So that's one of the main things I'm going to go through today. And so if you could answer the poll, so I kind of know what sort of level we're at. So, whether I need to talk about the basics of it or whether I can kind of go on to kind of going through the questions. But yeah, there are kind of 6 main question types in the section. So I've got an example question that I've written for each of them, which are fairly realistic. The wording may not be exactly the same, but the question styles are quite sort of similar. So I hope they'll be fun. I hope you'll all get them correct. But if you don't, then it's good sort of learning for you. So most people have answered that. So I will show you guys what kind of level everyone is at. So most people are kind of, knowing the basics, done some questions, which is pretty good. The one person who's confident, this will be good practice for you. Hope you get them all right. For the guys who need help, that's what I'm here for. So yeah, that's good for me to know. So let's get started. So as you can see top left there, this is going to last about an hour. I'll steer clear of being tempted to finish early to watch the match. It'll be half time anyway. So yeah, if there are any Croatians, you can leave now. So yeah, welcome to the 6med surgery. So in terms of who I am, some of you may have been to the previous ones, but just because everyone always kind of asks about my stats and things. So I'm a 5th year at Cambridge. I'm at Peterhouse. And I'm the 6med ACE ambassador. I film lots of videos for you guys. I do these kind of surgeries. I've written some blog pieces. I've just finished filming a masterclass series, which is kind of aiming to bridge the gap between where you guys are at now and when you start medical school. So once you've kind of been through the process and have your offers, then feel free to kind of check those out if you have a bit of spare money. They won't be out yet. They're being edited, but yeah, I've put quite a lot of effort into that. So I did the UCAT back when it was the UK CAT, and decision making back then was a little bit different. It was called decision analysis, and the format of it was a bit different. But I think right now the section is much better. I think it's much fairer, which you guys may not sort of agree with. But yeah, if you want to ask me anything about kind of my background or the sort of things that I kind of went through, I have experience of different interview styles as well, sort of MMI and panel and that sort of thing. So again, just pop them in the Q&A, and I've set aside some time for us to kind of talk through them. So in terms of what you'll go away with today, so some information, hopefully answers to your queries, and the main thing for today, I'll try and get through all 6 of the example questions. If not, you guys will have access to the slides anyway. They'll be uploaded on the 6med website. So if we don't get through all of them, I've written the kind of solutions and stuff anyway. So, okay. In terms of decision making, so there are a few people who don't really know too much about it. So I'll very briefly go through kind of the basics of it. So it's the second section, 29 questions in 31 minutes. So, you know, about a minute per question, leaving some time at the end. And decision making is a little bit more difficult because it can be based on text and kind of numbers and graphs and that sort of thing. So there's a bit of kind of numerical sort of applications. There's some kind of similar things to things like verbal reasoning involved in it. And you need to know certain terminologies. So, you know, your basic things like what an assumption is, what a premise is, being able to analyze things like when they use qualifiers and absolutes. So things like, you know, always, never, you know, sort of terminology like that to ensure that you can kind of identify sort of common misconceptions and common kind of logical fallacies and that sort of thing. So a kind of general summary of it. So there are 2 main question types in terms of the sort of format. It will either be a multiple choice question where you have the best from 4 options, or it'll be a yes, no type question. So you'll have 5 statements and each of them will kind of be a yes, no format. So those ones obviously take a little bit longer because you'll have to analyze each of the statements and put either yes or no for them, whereas the multiple choice is a bit easier. Below that, you can see I've put the 6 kind of main question types there. These are the 6 that we're going to go through. That graphic is taken directly from, there's another masterclass series, which I filmed last year, I think. I did one for the BMAT, one for the UCAT, one for the interview, and one for the personal statement. And I kind of go through each question type in detail. So again, if you have a little bit of spare money, you may want to check them out. There's no kind of obligation to, but that's essentially a sort of expanded version of what I go through in these kind of surgeries. So let's get started. So it'll probably be useful if you guys have like a piece of paper or a sort of whiteboard or something. You can use a calculator if you want, because there will be one in the exam. But if you're planning on using kind of, you know, estimations and rounding up, then it may be best to try and kind of practice that with these questions. But I just need my timer. Where's my phone? Oh, thank you. I have my trusty assistant here. Thank you. So I'll kind of roughly time it, but you know, it doesn't have to be kind of strict. So I'll give a kind of rough idea of when a minute has passed, which will be, you know, kind of the amount of time you'll have. But some of these questions are a little bit easier. So, some of them are a little bit harder. So unless anyone has any kind of comments or anything before we start, I'll just wait a little bit. Otherwise, what we'll do is I've kind of bunched it up into 2 questions. Then we have some time for Q&A, and then 2 more questions, and then we'll kind of finish off. So yeah, let's get started. So I'll start the timer now. It's 30 seconds gone. So this one is a bit of an easier one. So hopefully it shouldn't take the full minute. Okay, so I think I'll stop it there. So that's about 50 seconds. So you'd have a little bit more time. But the answer, is C. So this is a specific type of question called syllogisms, and what that essentially means is you have these statements, and you need to kind of see how they connect. And these can be really confusing if you sort of don't have a way of kind of going through them. So let me just out of interest, I've for each of the questions, I've kind of put this down. So if you can put whether or not you got it right. I was going to do you sort of voting on the actual question itself, but I figured some people kind of have a bit of anxiety about that. But yeah, so okay, pretty much everyone has got it right, which is good. This was an easy question to get you started. These can obviously be a lot more confusing. They can use kind of subjects that are not as kind of easy to think about as animals and dogs, but the key point here is kind of either constructing it as like a Venn diagram for the more complex ones, or identifying what the link is. So here, the link is that if the kind of thing that you're assessing is a dog, then it will have 4 legs. If the thing that you're assessing is an animal, it will have 2 legs. Potentially, and that means that that it can either be sort of 2 or 4, and therefore the kind of overall bracket here is animals. But yeah, syllogisms are something where if you kind of break it down into kind of like a word problem and identify what the link between the two is, then I think that can be super useful. But yeah, that was an easy one to get started with. The next question type is logical puzzles. So this one is a little bit more tricky. So I will start the timer now. $30 seconds. Okay, and that's a minute. So this would be a question where, I mean, obviously, ideally, if you have a sort of way to go through it, you'd have, you'd be able to do this in about a minute. But if you needed a bit more time, then obviously the previous question you could have done quite quickly, and then you could have used more time on this. So the answer for this one is B. And so again, just as before, let's see how everyone did. I'll be interested to see what the results of this are. Okay, interesting. Right. That was kind of what I expected. So I will show you, nearly everyone has voted. So I will share results, and you can see actually there was a bit of a split. And this one is quite tricky. Firstly, if you don't really have a way of assessing it. And secondly, you can easily make mistakes sort of in the heat of the exam. So what I'll do is if I stop sharing results there, but you can see if you did get it wrong, you're in the majority. So, there's no shame in that. If you did get it right, then, it's quite a tricky question. So well done. So with these types of questions with logical puzzles, my first tip is always to draw out some sort of table or diagram. It just makes things so much easier. It makes things clearer. And if you can get to the point where you kind of read the start of the question and immediately recognize it's this question type, then start drawing out your kind of table on your kind of whiteboard or whatever you have. Then it just makes it super easy. I made things a bit easier by making the names kind of A, B, C, D. Obviously, that won't be the case in the actual exam, so that might be a bit more confusing as well. But the first thing that we're kind of given is that Andy's favorite is firm clay, so we can kind of put that in straight away. The kind of key bit is that first bit I underlined there, because that's going to be an important piece of information a bit later. because we know that in terms of the rest of the favorites, Brian, Chelsea, and Diana, none of them can have a favorite that's also firm clay. So it must be the other ones. So hopefully that part is kind of not too confusing. So the next part then says the player who performed best on firm clay does not like grass or soft clay. So I've kind of written down the thought process on the right there. So the player who performed best on firm clay, we know can't be Andy because that would mean Andy's best and favorite are both firm clay. And we've been told that only Chelsea has performed best and has her favorite as the same. So hopefully that makes sense. And then also because the player performed best on firm clay doesn't like grass or soft clay, so we can remove those two. That means it's either acrylic or firm clay. Now, if that were to be firm clay, then that wouldn't kind of be an option because of that first underlined bit, because that would mean more than one person has a favorite as firm clay, which means whoever that person is who performed best on firm clay, their favorite must be acrylic. And so if their favorite is acrylic and their best is firm clay, those two are different, which means it can't be Chelsea. And that therefore means Brian and Diana, one of them is a firm clay one, and the one who has firm clay, their favorite must be acrylic. But we know whoever's favorite is acrylic is either going to be Brian or Diana. It cannot be Andy or Chelsea. If anyone's super confused by that, again, I'd recommend, sort of when the slides are up, kind of going through it and reading through that bit on the side. I'd be happy to kind of go through that more if people put that in the Q&A. But I'm aware of sort of time and needing to go through things. So just to kind of confirm, the answer is B. And note that you don't actually need to fill out the entire table to answer this question, and that's quite an important thing because that's something that can cost you extra time if you try and fill out the full table. So always make sure to kind of have some sort of mental note or some sort of physical way of marking what the key information is. Draw out some sort of table or diagram or some way to make it a lot easier to account for all of these bits of information. And that's probably the kind of best way to do this. And then the rest comes with practice. So yeah, hopefully for those of you who didn't get this question right, you can now see how you would sort of go through it systematically. And that would hopefully lead to you getting the right answer. So A, Andy's best surface is firm clay. We know that can't be true because we know his favorite is firm clay, and only Chelsea has the same favorite and best surface. C, Brian's best cannot be firm clay. Well, we don't know that. It could be, it might not be, but it's between Brian and Diana. One of them has their best as firm clay. And then D, Chelsea's best must be acrylic. Well, it's not must, it could be. Oh, sorry, no, not for Chelsea. So Chelsea's best must be acrylic. We know it can't be because Chelsea has the same best and favorite. And we know that it can't be acrylic. So that's actually one we can definitely say is incorrect, and that's why B is correct. And you know that between B and D, because they're opposites, obviously only one of them is gonna be correct. So yeah, as I said at the bottom there, you don't actually need to fill out the full table, which will save you some time. So yeah, now we'll have sort of 10 minutes of Q&A. So if you want to put your questions, and this can be about anything, by the way, just to reiterate, any kind of aspect of the kind of UCAT or BMAT, interviews, personal statement, life as a medic, anything at all, if you put it into the Q&A bit, and if you can upvote the sort of questions that you want me to answer, then that would be useful, as I'll know which ones to kind of answer. And so we've got one so far. I'll give you guys a little bit of time to put your questions down. And then, yeah, we will go through them. Okay, so we've got a few questions now. So I'll start with, because we've had one that has more than one upvote. So is 650 a good score? So whenever you're thinking about UCAT scores, it ultimately depends on where you're applying. So different universities will use the UCAT in different ways. Some of them will have cutoffs. Some of them will kind of use it together in another score. Some of them will kind of consider where you fall within the cohort. So generally speaking, 650 isn't bad. It's generally competitive, but I would kind of say if you want a sort of a number above which you'll probably be safe, I would think of something like 700 as a kind of solid score. Obviously, these things also depend on the rest of your application as well. But if you're applying to a university, for example, that kind of takes the UCAT into consideration with other things, then if you have kind of solid grades, a good personal statement uh, as kind of part of your application, then obviously that's going to be a lot more competitive. So yeah, generally I would say if you want a kind of short answer, is 650 a good score? It's pretty good. But you'd be in the realm of sort of needing to apply strategically. So as a general rule of thumb for the UCAT, it's probably a good idea to take a look at different universities and how they actually use the UCAT, as they're normally quite open with saying how they actually kind of use it as part of the interview and ultimately the sort of selection process. So I hope that was useful. Um, we have a few that have one upvote. If someone could act as a tiebreaker and upvote one of them to 2, then I'll start with that one. Okay, we've got a few. So the clearing one actually, so that came up on the 6Med WhatsApp group. From what I understand, last year there wasn't really anything for clearing, and this year there will be even more applicants because there will have been people who deferred from last year. So I think it will be unlikely that there'll be very much at all for clearing for medicine, which is such a shame. It really shouldn't be the case. But I think clearing ordinarily is a bit of a sort of lottery whether you'll get anything or not, and that was before kind of COVID times and everything being affected. So I think it would be unlikely that there'll be much for clearing, but I don't think there have been any kind of official statements or any stats or anything released by kind of UCAS or anything. But yeah, if that's something that you're considering, definitely get clued up on the UCAS website with the actual process involved in clearing, and ultimately you never know, which I think is probably just good general advice for medicine. So yeah, good luck to the person who wrote that if you're looking to do that. How should someone write the opening of the personal statement? So quite a common question. I've written a few blog articles on the personal statement for 6Med, which I think are a good starting point. In terms of the opening, you want something that's going to be interesting, first and foremost. That doesn't necessarily mean constructing some sort of story or trying to kind of really kind of push the boat out and come up with something that's written very eloquently and very sort of with high level English. It just needs to be something interesting, something unique to you, and something that kind of summarizes quite nicely your reasons for doing medicine. I think it's good to start off with your reasons just straight away, get that kind of out of the way, get the person who's reading it actually interested in you as a person, as after all, it is a personal statement. So try to make it something relevant to you, either something you experienced on work experience or some sort of project you've done or something you've read. Try and make it honest as well, because it will be a lot clearer sort of when you get invited to interview that it's kind of your genuine reasons. And put something that also ideally will link quite nicely to sort of the rest of the bits you're going to talk about. So I wrote about how antibiotic resistance is a good example of the kind of two sides of medicine, because you have the sort of academic side of understanding that the science behind antibiotics and how resistance develops, but then you also have the sort of communication aspect of trying to stop this from happening and telling patients why they may not be allowed antibiotics even though they feel ill, and the whole idea of sort of a virus versus a bacteria. And that was a kind of good link because I did my EPQ on MRSA, so I could kind of link it to that. And that was something that was quite honest for me. It was, I liked the idea of those two sides of medicine. It was something that I had some, personal kind of projects to talk about. And, I think ultimately it wasn't anything that seemed sort of a little bit fantastical, which some people tried to put. So yeah, I would say do that. So in kind of a nutshell, make it personal to you, make it honest, and make it a little bit interesting. Just something not that run of the mill. So hopefully that is useful. Um, how much time to prepare for the UCAT? So it depends on a few things. So firstly, when you're planning on sitting the UCAT, I would always recommend spreading it out over sort of around 2 months, and that means going from absolute zero, not knowing anything about the UCAT, to being able to sit it. It will kind of depend slightly on how exactly you're going to revise for it, whether you have other things to do as well. If you're doing the BMAT as well, if you have any projects over the summer. But generally speaking, I think 2 months is a good amount of time. It's good to start off familiarizing yourself with the sections. So, come to these surgeries, read up online of what the actual sections are, what the subtypes of each question are, understanding the timings, and then start to look at some examples to kind of solidify this. Then the kind of next phase of that will be, a few weeks of kind of developing any of the skills you'll need. So, your quick mental maths, or, fractions, or maybe it's kind of more word-based things like skimming, and sort of developing those things. And then it'll be a few weeks of just hammering out kind of practice questions. And then the last few weeks of sort of timed questions, and trying to do whole sections, and then eventually whole mock tests, so that you're getting used to kind of the fatigue that comes with doing it over time. So overall, if you're going to kind of space that out and not have to do kind of 8 hours a day as some people do, that would probably take a couple of months to do. So yeah, I'd recommend kind of getting started from now. So hopefully that's useful. How much more competitive are London medical schools? Yeah, they tend to be slightly more oversubscribed, but medical school as a whole is very competitive. Obviously, if you're looking at something like Oxbridge and I guess especially UCL, Imperial, they do tend to be quite competitive. I think the reason for that is because there's more of a kind of academic side of things there. So it's perceived as if you sort of have higher grades, you should probably aim there. And because medical applicants as a whole are a very intelligent bunch, it tends to be a lot of people who apply there. And also because of the kind of reputations that they have. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're any better. Ultimately, you should pick a medical course that sounds like it would appeal the most to you. And maybe actually if you want to kind of play the numbers, it might be better you kind of applying elsewhere. But on the flip side of that, you never know. I certainly didn't think I'd get a place at Cambridge, or even UCL, and I ended up getting my offers. So yeah, I'd say even if even though they are more competitive, if that is kind of your aspiration, then feel free to go for it. Because ultimately you have four choices, so it's okay if one of them is kind of a really ambitious one. Okay, so we can continue with the others after the next few practice questions. If you think of any more questions as we go along, and feel free to kind of put them down. But yeah, we will kind of return back to the Q&A. But let's go ahead. So, whoops, I kind of skipped ahead. So we're going to do two more practice questions. So again, kind of get ready to write things down and use those juicy brains of yours. So I will set a timer for a minute, and let's do the next question now. That's 30 seconds. And that's time. So yeah, this one is more difficult, as I said before, because of it being the sort of yes/no format. Because as you can see, you can't just sort of discard options and then kind of pick one. You have to sort of analyze each of them and see if they're sort of logical conclusions or not. And this one has the added kind of part of requiring some sort of arithmetic and some quick maths. And yeah, I was always someone who preferred to do kind of estimations and mental maths because I really didn't like the sort of calculator format. But if you're someone who needs that, then by all means, kind of do that. Ishrak has asked if they're recorded. So yes, I believe they are now recorded. So you can get both the recording and also you can get the slides as well. And I've written the sort of the thought processes behind kind of the questions as well. If you need more time. Also, Emma, sorry I missed your question. Does the UCAT crash course with 6med include access to a question bank? The crash course, I don't think it does, but I think there are lots of kind of UCAT bundles which contain the question bank. And obviously you can buy the kind of UCAT Ninja for however kind of long you need it as a kind of standalone. And I don't think it's too expensive. Obviously, I know some people genuinely don't have any sort of spare income, in which case I think the bursary application form might still be open. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, feel free to kind of check out. If you go onto the website and click on the kind of UCAT banner at the top, it will take you to the part where it talks through the like bundles and that sort of stuff. So yeah, let's go through the answers of this. Okay, so here is the, oh, I've just realized actually I changed one of the percentages, but forgot to change it back on the original one. So I think it still works out. What do you think? Yeah, it still works out anyway. Okay, that's cool. Just on statement A. So these are the answers to it. So again, just before I go through them, if we could answer the poll, just so I can see. Also, it's useful for me to know kind of what level these questions are at. Okay, interesting. Okay, so nearly everyone has voted. Just a few people vote. So it's good to see that no one so far has put that they've got all of them wrong, which is good. If you have, that's okay, because you're here to learn. Okay, I'll stop it there. So you can see everyone got some of it right, which is good. That may mean that I made a mistake, which happens, but hopefully it hasn't. So let's go through them. So for the first one, as I said, I changed it to make it a bit easier. So I put over 25%, which is still 30%. So because it's asking for the rate of increase for A, essentially you need to work out, from May to June, it goes from about 16,800 to about 21,700. So that's roughly an increase of 5,000. So you're essentially working out what percentage increase is that from 16,800. And that's, just under a third. So if you wanted to work that out quickly, essentially, if it's over 25%, 16,800, if you divide that by 4, which is pretty easy to do, that's just, about sort of 4,200. And so you can clearly see that 5,000 is above that much. So that would be a good way to kind of quickly estimate that. just a general kind of rule for these sorts of questions, by the way, I would say read the kind of stuff around the table first, and then look at the table, look at the kind of titles of it, get it sorted in your head what you're actually looking at. So, this is sales kind of over a period of a few consecutive months, and then they've given the percent of that sale that were from online sales. So really get it sorted in your head what you're actually looking at, and look out for any kind of cheeky little tricks that they might pull, like potentially changing units or leaving some months out, and making sure that you're really aware what the headings mean. So B, the total amount of money from online sales never dropped below 2,000. So this is essentially working out using the percentages to work out how much actual money went there. So if it's saying never dropped below 2,000, then you'll want to go to where it's most likely to have dropped below that to save yourself some time, rather than working through all of the months, because it's quite obvious that if they're making over 15,000 and there's a decent amount of percentage from online sales, it probably isn't gonna be below that. So I would go straight to August, where you have the smallest amount of sales, and so if you work out kind of 12% of that, that's not going to be 2,000. So that B is no, because they've used the word never. So that's quite an important one. C, so this one, does it follow a similar trend? So, there's a kind of general trend of it starts off quite high and then it dips, and then there's an increase and then a dip at the end. And that is kind of the general trend with both sales income and percent from online. So C would be yes. D, there was a 50% rate of increase in online sales from March to June. So when we're talking about rate of increase, we're talking about if you go from 2 to 4, for example, you've essentially added another 2 to it to go to 4. So you've added another 100%. And so that rate of increase would be 100%. And that can sometimes be quite sort of confusing. So with D, the kind of percentage goes from about 10% to about 20%. So you've essentially doubled it. And so what you've done is you've increased it by 100%. And so that's why D is incorrect. And then E, over 12,000 of sales income in Feb was from non-online sales. So this is asking you to kind of work out, so they've given you 35%, so you need to work out 65%. So I've written down how you would kind of approximate that if you were doing it kind of mentally. And you can kind of see that it's going to be something around over kind of 13,000. So yeah, that was quite a tricky one. They normally make it a little bit easier. So they'd say something like over 11,000 or over 10,000 worth of sales. So yeah, but you can sort of see how these questions can be quite difficult if you kind of don't know exactly how to kind of navigate them. And if you're just sort of a bit lost with the table. And also, whenever you see a big table and you see those 5 options, one strategy, if you really struggle with these questions, might actually just be to guess an answer and then kind of flag it and move on to the next question, because there might be some easier questions kind of coming up. So someone, I think, raised their hand. I don't know if that was accidental. If it wasn't accidental, feel free to put in the chat what you want me to address. But yeah, otherwise I will getting quite a few raised hands. Is that okay? I can't see anything in the chat. So I think we've got, yeah, so we've got another question now coming up. So if I set the timer for that. Thank you. And so let's go to the next question. 30 seconds. And that's about time. So this hopefully isn't too difficult. But if you haven't come across a question like this, then you may get it wrong just by not knowing kind of exactly how to kind of navigate them. So the answer is D. So let's see how everyone did on that. So again, I will launch a poll. So did you get that right? Did you get D? If you could vote. Okay, great. So a few people still left. Some people may not have answered it, which is cool. So yeah, I think we'll end that. So most people got it right, which is good to see. Again, if you were one of the ones who didn't get it right, let's go through it and kind of see, what you maybe should have done. Again, it may be that you sort of haven't looked at these questions before. But so the kind of key point here is, again, something people don't really explain, but these kind of assumption questions. An assumption is essentially something that isn't stated directly, but it kind of links the kind of statement that they give in the question. It links it to the one in the answer. So if there's anything in the answers that are kind of stated directly, then it can't really be an assumption by definition. So what you have to look at is, so it's talking about giving money specifically to hospitals, and the reason for this is improving the health of the general population. And I think yeah, so here we go. So here are the kind of assumptions that I put. So the important thing is it's not the one that kind of sounds like it's correct. So I went controversial and actually put the correct answer here as D, which says we shouldn't give money to hospitals. Now, obviously, in real life, we should, but you're directly assessing whether this statement is kind of a logical conclusion from the original statement given. You're not assessing whether or not this is, something that's actually correct or not. And that's an important distinction. So with A, that's kind of implying that the money will go to healthcare workers, and that will therefore improve the health of the general population, which obviously doesn't make sense. And therefore, A isn't a kind of logical conclusion. B, that kind of implies that hospitals will kind of not use advertisements as much, and that apparently would improve health, which again doesn't kind of follow logically. C is talking about defense systems. That's kind of not talking about improving the health of the general population. So that doesn't logically follow. But D does logically follow because it's specifically talking about improving the health of the general population. So that's directly kind of addressing what was put in the statement. So hopefully you can see here the kind of link between the statements, which needs to be kind of direct and robust and not making any kind of incorrect assumptions. And that's kind of the whole sort of premise of this question type. So yeah, good to see most of you got that correct. If you need a bit of sort of brushing up on your kind of assumptions and sort of logical fallacies and that sort of thing, there are plenty of resources online to kind of look at, flaws in arguments and that sort of thing. And again, I go through this in a lot more detail in the masterclasses. So let's go through the Q&A again. Sorry, can I set a... Sorry. Yeah, I've got my girlfriend helping me with timing. So yeah. So set another, should we say 10? Or might not be able to do a full 10 minutes, but I'll go through the Q&A questions. So if you guys can kind of upvote the questions you want me to answer. There are a few on 3, but yeah, if you can continue upvoting and writing down your questions, I'll give a sort of minute or so for those to come through, and then I'll kind of start answering them. In case anyone's interested, the score coming up to halftime is 0-0 in the England-Croatia match. So yeah, I will answer questions in 20 seconds or so. Okay, so I'll answer Megan's question. So, how much harder is the BMAT? So, I think it depends on numerous things. You'll quickly find that's my answer to most questions, because these things aren't sort of, they don't make it simple for you guys. So the BMAT is very different, and so different doesn't necessarily mean harder. It kind of depends how you work. So the BMAT is it's more kind of, it requires a slightly higher level of knowledge. Theoretically it should be GCSE level, but the application of it is obviously quite difficult. The BMAT is easier in certain ways in that it's, the kind of format of it is slightly more similar to the questions that you will do for kind of, GCSE and A level in terms of the kind of format of them. And also BMAT has the essay component. And if you're someone who likes writing essays and is able to kind of construct kind of coherent, eloquent essays, then, the BMAT could potentially be a good thing for you to do. The UCAT, is one of those things where if you can think very quickly, if you can think very clearly, and if you can get used to kind of pattern recognition and those sorts of things, then it's probably easier. I'd say overall, it depends whether or not you have more of a kind of sort of scientific brain, because the BMAT, especially, there's a whole section dedicated just to the three sciences and maths. Section 1 of the BMAT does kind of overlap in some skills, but it's kind of presented in quite a different way. So I would say BMAT might not even necessarily be harder for some people. Some people would actually probably find BMAT easier. But the UCAT, I think, is generally slightly easier because the actual kind of level of knowledge you need is kind of lower. It's more the timing aspect, which is higher. So yeah, if you're someone who's debating whether or not to do both, the easiest thing to do is just to learn a bit more about the BMAT. So again, kind of find out the basics of it, what the format is, exactly what they test, look at some practice questions, and don't fall into the trap of kind of looking at questions and kind of panicking because they seem super hard and you have no idea of kind of doing it. Look for example questions where they give a structured breakdown of the answers, because that's going to show you, is it likely that you'll get to a point where you will be able to teach yourself this kind of thought process. Because anyone at the beginning of the process, when they're presented with a BMAT question, is going to find it difficult unless it's a super easy one. So yeah, I hope I answered that for you. So do you think competition will be even higher this year because of COVID? Unfortunately, probably yes. As I said before, there will have been students who deferred from last year. Well, I know there definitely are quite a lot. And that essentially will mean there will be more students overall. Obviously, there will be more of a sort of allowance of this. Generally speaking, universities should hopefully be a little bit more lenient, and sort of things like center assessed grades and all of that kind of mess. They'll hopefully be more lenient on that side of things, but there will probably be more people applying. There's also the impact of during a pandemic, you get that sort of call to action of if you're someone who wants to apply for medicine, you sort of feel like you almost in that weird kind of medicine masochistic brain that we have, you kind of want to help people. So it kind of makes you want to apply even more. So more people might apply because of that. So yeah, but that shouldn't put you off from applying if it's what you want to do, because ultimately, whether you have a 1 in 5 chance or a 1 in 7 chance or a 1 in 9 chance, the odds are always stacked against you anyway, and they always would be. So there's no harm in applying if it's what you really want to do. Because ultimately, whether you get it this year or next year or the year after, or you do a different degree and go through the graduate entry, there are always routes into medicine, and you shouldn't kind of, belittle your own kind of skills and knowledge, and think less of yourself because you're imagining this kind of entire swarm of students who are just absolutely perfect in every way. Which is certainly what I did, and then I got some very good advice and applied to Cambridge, and that's how I got my place. So yeah, that got pretty deep. So for UCL, will you be at an advantage if you exceed A star AA? Yeah, I mean, from a grades point of view, yeah, of course you will be. I think quite a lot of students will have 2 or 3 A stars, generally speaking, for UCL. Not that that should put you off if you don't think you can get that, but yeah, I think if you can exceed the grades, you're always at a sort of advantage there. But there are obviously other aspects to your application as well, that you need to kind of bear in mind. It's definitely worth kind of making sure your grades meet the minimum. Ideally, getting over that, but it's better to have kind of generally a strong application. So making sure you're also working hard on your admissions tests and you're working hard on your personal statement. And that will help you to kind of have a more well-rounded application. So there may be a student who has higher grades than you, but maybe the rest of it will be kind of lower. So yeah, that's something to bear in mind. So how long do we have left? We have 10 minutes. Let me answer a few more. These look like some shorter questions. So what did I get on the BMAT? So I can't remember my exact scores, but I got 6s for 6 point something for section 1 and 2. Section 3, I got 4.5A. I found the BMAT quite difficult. I did not work in a very structured way. I went into it not knowing what all of the kind of question types were. So I just kind of answered them as they came up. I remember being in a massive panic in section 1 because I did not kind of use my time very well. But I always kind of enjoyed writing essays. So I think my essay was decent. Yeah, that was one where I thought I could do quite well. And I was aiming for a sort of 4A. And yeah, I met people at Cambridge who had, kind of 7s, and someone I met got, I think, like 8.6 for section 1, I think 9 for section 2, and then like a 5A or something. And some of those people got in, some of them didn't. So it's not the kind of you don't necessarily need an insanely good score. Obviously, you guys will have a bit more competition, so you might need, I think if you get in the 6s, that will be quite competitive. And for the essay, as long as you get over 3A, I think that's okay. But definitely focus on section 1 and 2. Does the DM section have an NA or just yes, no? I believe it's just yes, no for the 5 option questions, unless they've recently changed it. So yeah. And then what did I get on the UCAT / so I said the BMAT for the UCAT. I think I got, so I did it quite a while ago, so I couldn't find any like emails or anything, but I think I got 810 and then band 1 for SJT. And SJT was quite new when I did it, so not every university used it. I think most of them do now, but still, some of them don't. But yeah, again, for UCAT, I'd say anything kind of over 700 is good. Anything over 750 is very competitive. And anything 800 and above, you don't have to worry about your score. And then for SJT, most people get band 1, so that's where you should hopefully be aiming for. So yeah, and Emma's question, I think I answered. Okay, so I'm aware of time. For the person who's asking about quantitative reasoning, there will be a surgery on that. So I guess I would advise to turn up to the surgery, and I'll go through advice in more detail. Chris's question, I kind of answered before. It sort of depends on how much time you allocate. So how many kind of weeks and months you have. I'm very much in the camp of working for shorter hours but working more intensely. So I'm not a fan of doing these kind of 8-hour days. But if you leave yourself 2 weeks to do it all, you don't really have a choice. So I would say maybe do some in the morning first thing, do a couple of hours, maybe do maybe an hour at some point in the afternoon, and then a little bit more in the evening. So maybe kind of 4 hours kind of maximum, and that will give yourself time to kind of do other fun things, and especially if you're doing both of them, and then spread that out over quite a few weeks and ideally a few months, and that should be plenty of time if you're kind of efficient and you have a good plan, you know exactly what you need to do, and you kind of have some sort of question bank or something for some good question practice. And then do Cambridge have a scoring process for your GCSE grades? So they basically take everything into account. So it's not like Oxford where they kind of calculate a score. They just kind of take it into account. So I am not aware of an actual kind of scoring specifically for the GCSEs. They do kind of score you based on interviews, and I guess they kind of rank students based on things. But yeah, it's a lot more kind of holistic, and they sort of take everything into account. So sorry I had to rush through those last ones. I've got some parts in the chat. Where are my headphones from? I got them on Amazon. They just look for ones that kind of light up green. I guess they're technically a gaming headset, but yeah, they're pretty awesome. And no problem, Emma. So I've got two more questions to go through. So we will finish off by doing those. We should actually finish just on time. So again, if you guys could get some, paper ready or get yourselves into the mindset, we'll do the two last kind of question types. So let's get started. So let's go. It's 30 seconds. Okay, I'll stop that one a little bit earlier because I think this one's a bit easier. Obviously, there are a few things trying to trip you up here. The first one is kind of giving you some information you don't actually need. The second thing is switching from percentages to probabilities. And the third thing is kind of testing your sort of and or rule. So, hopefully you guys have got this. So the answer is D. And as before, let's see how you guys did. Awesome. Keep voting. Yeah. So someone's put, please stop asking. So yeah, I hope that means no, but also, yeah, I'm aware that this could be, yeah. Okay. About 2/3 of people have voted in that. So hopefully most people got it right. So yeah. So it looks like most people got it right. And yeah, this was not too difficult. And to be honest, the probability questions generally aren't that difficult. It's just about not making silly mistakes. So, a really silly mistake would have been putting C because you put her the first probability as 4 out of 10 instead of 6 out of 10, because obviously she will have failed the first one. And again, just converting from your percentages to probabilities, making mistakes with that, those sorts of things. But generally speaking, when it comes to probability questions, again, if you can kind of simplify it down in your mind, work out exactly what you need, and kind of write it out in words or draw some sort of diagram, something to make sure that you're not making silly mistakes. And then when you get the answer, try and kind of work backwards from it if you think you have enough time. And then, basic things like knowing your basic probabilities, how to convert between decimals, percentages, and fractions, knowing your kind of and or rule. So when you multiply and when you add fractions, and yeah, looking out for kind of little tricks that they might try and pull. So we'll do the final question type, which is, oh, sorry. Acting like I know your password. Thank you. So let's do the final question type now. Sorry, I've got the 30-second mark, but this is your 15-second timer. Okay, and let's end it there. So you would have got a few extra seconds if you were going based on a minute. So the answer is D. And again, let's see what we've got on the polls. So if you can answer the poll, hopefully this one wasn't too bad. So the Venn diagram questions, some people find them super difficult. It just depends how your brain works. Some people find them really easy. I personally find them quite easy because it's sort of like a visual thing. Also, the way they ask these questions, they can ask it in multiple different ways. So they can give you information and have the answer options as different Venn diagrams and ask you which of them represents the data. They can give you numbers and ask you questions based on the numbers. They can give you ones like this, which are more kind of word associated ones. They can give you statements. So things like, different like breeds of dog and that sort of thing, where some overlap and some don't, and things like that, which can be quite confusing. So there are different kind of ways in which Venn diagrams can be used, but this is quite a sort of standard one. So you can see most people got it right. For the ones who didn't, that's okay. And let's sort of go through it. So I think some people have put some stuff in the chat. Oh, okay, just some more thank yous. Thanks very much. So A is something that could be quite confusing. Whenever you see a circle within another circle, it's the inner one that is sort of, I tried to find a way to word this correctly, but essentially everything that's represented by the inner circle can be described as being part of the outer circle. So if the inner circle were, let's say, I don't know, you had a population of people, and let's say the inner circle were people with blue eyes, and the outer circle were people with blonde hair, then it would be correct to say in this population, the everyone that has blue eyes also has blonde hair, because all of the inner circle, all of the blue eye circle is contained within the blonde hair circle. But because there is space around it, so there are some parts of the kind of outer circle that isn't overlapped by the inner circle, that means that you can't say the opposite way around. And that's why A is incorrect. So that was to kind of trip you up in that way. And then B is just knowing, in terms of things overlapping. I always find quite a good way to go through these questions is to kind of layer the circles or the shapes. So start off with one and then look for when a second one overlaps with it, and kind of outline kind of mentally the area where they overlap, and then look for the third one and then outline where that overlaps with your kind of original overlapping one, and kind of build it up like that, rather than trying to kind of look at them all at the same time, because that can get quite confusing. They may also kind of throw at you different shapes as well, just to kind of confuse you. So they might not all be circles in a Venn diagram. So yeah, I hope these have been useful. They're, as I said, pretty representative in terms of the kind of type of questions. And this is kind of the 6 kind of main types of questions you'll come across. So if you can, come up with kind of algorithms for each of these types, start to do some practice questions. If you start to get them wrong, look at what your thought process was and look at what it should have been. Most question banks will have kind of explanations of why answers are incorrect and why others are correct, which is probably the most useful part. And yeah, I wouldn't say any of this is kind of too conceptually difficult. It's just about knowing what process to go through and then trying not to make silly mistakes, which inevitably some of them will happen. And cut yourself some slack. It's a pretty time pressured exam, so you will make some mistakes, but that's okay. So yeah, unless there are any kind of final comments, I will end the surgery here. The next one will be in, I think, about 2 weeks' time, and I think that will be, let me have a look. I think we've gone in test order, so I think it'll be quantitative reasoning next after this. So that'll be a fun one, lots of maths. Why am I so smart? I just know how to sound smart. It's the ultimate skill in medicine. Is knowing how to say unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia instead of just the patient is yellow. So yeah. So thank you guys for attending, and I will potentially catch you on the next surgery. And hope you have a lovely weekend. And let's hope England can do something in the second half. So yeah, see you guys.